Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this exclusive live fireside chat on the emerging privacy regulations in the Middle East, challenges and solutions. Well, just to set the context, the data breaches, cybercrimes, cyber attacks, and data espionage have been on the rise in the last couple of years, particularly in the context of the Middle East, which has seen tremendous rise in the same. Well, just to share some interesting data, some of the data breach costs have been almost as high as $7 million per data breach. So that's the enormity of the situation. So there are a lot of privacy regulations being formed and imposed by the countries everywhere. And today's topic of discussion, well, we shall be discussing what are the data breaches, what are the data security solutions, the challenges, and how data security solutions can help address those challenges. So, with that, please welcome our eminent set of panelists here today. Well, first up, we have Sirin Aktas, who is the CIO and the executive committee member at Edenred Turkey. She has more than 21 years of experience in leading diverse teams globally in implementing various IT related projects. And interestingly, she's also a PhD candidate pursuing and observing the human robot interaction. So, very interesting indeed. Next up, we also have Rashed Alothman, who is a veteran in the IT space with more than 35 years of experience. He's the ex-CIO of Riyadh Bank. He's also had positions as CIO of Arabian Centers Company and also Bank Al Bilad and many others, of course. And we also have with us the founder and CEO of Seclore, Vishal Gupta, who is graduated from IIT Mumbai. Welcome, Vishal. And he is also, I'm told, top 1% of the physics people who specialize in physics in the country. And he's also, of course, many other things. He's an avid sportsman and also specializes in biometric security. Well, so you have eminent set of panelists there for you today. And just to remind all our viewers before I hand over the mic to Vishal that we have some amazing contests that we are running where you can win from some free goodies for the lucky winners. And of course, we also were running a contest where you could get 5 attendees and win amazing Amazon gift vouchers. And also we have free consultation which is available from the security experts at Seclore. And of course, no fireside chat can be, left or be more interesting without any questions from the audience. So we encourage our audience to ask the questions to our panelists. You can share or ask your questions by using the Q&A box, and we shall take them up towards the end of the session, and we'll try and cover as much as we can, time permitting. Having said that, let's now move over to the interesting topic, and I hand over the mic to Vishal to take the discussions forward from here. Over to you, Vishal.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Venki. And by the way, the physics thing is just something I tell my son, so don't announce it.
Well,
Just kidding.
well, the Middle East region now knows it, so yeah, so that's very interesting indeed. Yeah.
Uh, I will just take the first couple of minutes to set up the context for this conversation for everyone. The Middle East region has been very active on the security and privacy front, both in the number of just the amount of cybercrime activities, the number of data breaches, as well as regulators uplifting the privacy and security regulations in the region to make sure that every enterprise kind of rises to a basic minimum level. The first, and no fireside chat, no security conversation can start without some numbers. I'll try to keep the maximum time to draw from the experience from the panel of experts we have here in the chat, but just a couple of points of data here. So the Middle East has the second highest average breach cost among the whole world. There was a survey done of 17 different regions, Southeast Asia, JPAC, and Africa, and so on. The Middle East came among the top two. And the underlying reason for this is that data breaches in the Middle East largely remain undisclosed and undetected for a long period of time. Right? So there is a breach, and breaches happen all over the world. But in the Middle East, these breaches continue to remain undetected and undisclosed for a much longer period of time than the rest of the world. Right? So that's one important kind of statistic to remember. When you mentioned that the data breach costs have risen, and right now the average is $7 million, right? And that's the average cost of a data breach in the Middle East alone, right? The couple of other important things as we come to privacy regulations is that uh, about 71% of the companies believe that they will have to comply and spend more and more resources in privacy regulation compliance going forward. Right? That's most of the companies in the region, and most companies also believe that besides privacy compliance, reputational risks are the dominant reason that they need to take privacy and security measures. Right? So if there's a loss of trust from the customers or the investors or the government and so on, that's going to harm the company a lot uh, beyond just the fines and the overheads of managing a privacy violation. Right? And the sharp contrast to that is that only about 50% of the companies in the region believe that their privacy regulation initiatives or the compliance initiatives are adequate to comply with the regulations that are already there and the ones which are emerging, right? Um, I think that I'll kind of move on to the Q&A, but I was talking about the extremely high amount of time that a data breach remains undetected and unreported, right? And in the Middle East, that number is 260 days. That's a lot. That's like 9 months before before a breach is reported and then identified first and then reported. And of course, there are various reasons for breaches to happen: um, malicious attacks, human errors, system glitches, and the likes. Right? So there are all kinds of reasons for these attacks, but there are a couple of very important things that in the last 5 years we've seen a lot of privacy regulations. And just like the rest of the world, what is happening is that every country is coming up with its own privacy regulation, and every industry regulator is coming up with its own. So the banking industry regulator or the insurance industry regulator or the oil and gas regulator and so on in their respective countries are each coming up with their own set of privacy and security regulations, making it a very, very complex and difficult task for any enterprise, for any organization to make sure that it is always compliant, right? And that's just the multitude of privacy regulations are what's the biggest reasons that enterprises are ending up spending more and more time and energy in security and privacy compliance, right? So that's the context, and we are here to draw from almost 60-70 years of experience that this panel has in having seen these privacy regulations evolve and then actually running organizations which have had to comply with in more than one case more than one privacy regulation, right, of different kinds, right? So I wanted to first invite Sirin to talk about a little bit about her experience of having seen these privacy regulations and across the region. And Sirin, you worked across the region in the Middle East. Can you talk about the evolution and your experience of privacy regulation compliance?
Okay, guys. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that opportunity, guys. Having 20 years of experience and being part of multinational companies, especially in the Middle East region, I have seen the evolution with the regulations. Actually, since I was managing one of the biggest FMCG, I was the head of IT at one of the biggest FMCG company and responsible for Turkey, Iran, and Israel. So those are three very different countries in the Middle East, and by time we exposed to GDPR like regulations, as more and more social and economic activities have place online, then the importance of privacy and data protection is increasingly recognized. And it all started in Europe maybe, but having Europe reference, I mean GDPR reference, Turkey started, it is own law based on GDPR in maybe 7 years or 8 years ago, and then Israel started to put some regulations to contain some of the features in GDPR, but also some extra, rules on passwords like penetration testing, some extra rules. And Iran, it is especially regulated by cybercrime law and cyber police order regulating activities. But also, as you rightly said, with some industries having different rules and different evolutions, e-commerce law also provided some basics for personal data protections in terms of commercial transactions. So, in my experience, I have seen, it evolved by time, and it is still evolving, especially, based in Turkey right now. I've seen also industries need some more clarities on the regulations, even though they apply to some extent. They need, clarifications, and also the customers needs both, how can I say, both sensitivity on the data, since they are now more exposed to online channels. So it is all on the table. It is also part of the role of IT right now. We are now also equal to a legal manager, knowing the regulations, and the rules. So it is with us.
Thank you, Sirin. And Mr. Rashed,
You're welcome.
Sama, you've dealt with Sama, you've dealt with Sadaya, you've dealt with NCA, and I'm sure there are many other three-letter acronyms of regulators coming up with their own compliance. Talk to us a little bit about your experience of regulatory bodies as well as regulations.
Well, those regulatory bodies, except for Sama been handling the banking sector in Saudi Arabia for so long and being given all the rules and regulations and compliance. But along with the security and sensitivity of the data, and now with the massive adaptation of human and everybody's adaptation to the online channels and the electronic channels today and transactions, especially after the pandemic and the fast forward that was taken by everybody to have that kind of evolution and move on with it. And this is where Sadaya and IC came up with, and they still evolve with coming up with rules and regulations. And also the government with the vision of 2030 has also set rules, and also the jurisdiction systems also has started adapting. Now, in the past, crimes or electronic crimes were, lightly understood or being punished, but today it is have a very severe punishment and announcements that coming up from, the jurisdiction system, where everybody is today is watching out for such an information being exchanged or leaked. And today I have seen also an announcement in the newspaper where they're talking about leak of information and the punishment to that, and it is something massive. It is not something small, and such thing like that, it is becoming, and the awareness today is coming up and reaching out to everybody around in the kingdom. So given that this kind of evolvement in the past few years, moving forward, this kind of adaptation is giving us a boost in the future. Given that this this is still going to be an evolvement and adaptation by also the everybody, where they're trying to understand exactly what does that mean. I hope that I have shed some light over there, but the exercise is just started. It is only the beginning. We have not reached an ultimate, and it will never be like that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always evolving. And just follow up question for you, Mr. Rashed, is that knowing that there are many different regulations that an organization has to comply with at the same time, are you seeing common patterns, like common factors, that every regulation is saying here is the minimum set that you need to be, and then it gets into details?
Yes, it is, and there is also a coherence between all the regulatories today, where they are back to back and they're setting up and they are referring to each other according to each level of those kind of regulations and the set of rules as a compliance and the compliance body. So SAMA is playing the role of making sure those rules are being followed. But when it comes
Mhm.
to security and data security and what have you, NIC is putting the rules and making sure it is being cascaded through SAMA to all the banks and vice versa. And also, we've been given also the chance from the banking sector to talk and make sure it is being also set properly, and we speak our minds, and it is being adopted as well from both ends. So it is not one way; it is both ways.
Yeah, it's good to see that regulators are number one talking to each other, and then they're also talking to the regulated industries themselves for feedback. That's very valuable. Shirin, have you seen common patterns? I mean, you talked about Israel and Iran and Turkey, which is within the Middle East context. It can be countries can't be as different as these three. What are common patterns that you're seeing in the evolution of these privacy regulations?
Yeah, the common patterns, generally is about the classification of data, accessing data, the controls, and the export of the data, and mostly, data minimization rules mostly apply to each, each, let's say, Middle East countries. Since, generally speaking, the rules apply. Us to store as less data as possible. So that is one of the similar pattern. And data export, for GDPR it is easy, since GDPR export rule is simple. Data on European residents can only to be exported to places with similar data export rules. Technically, this is really simple, but out of Europe, and if you are working with Europe, then it is hard, so even though there are similar patterns, especially on data export part, there's a big confusion, or there's a big mess, let's say.
Got it. And at Seclore, see, we work with a lot of enterprises in their privacy initiatives, and we are usually on top of the privacy regulations as well as how they have evolved. And among our common patterns that we've seen is, some of this you already mentioned, Shireen, which is that nearly every privacy regulations forces enterprises to discover and classify their data first. I mean, you can't control uh, something that you can't monitor or track. But once you go beyond that, I think just protecting, being able to track data, governance, segregation of duties is something that we've seen emerge as very common requirement. So there has to be a system of checks and balances around data. I think what we've seen in more recent times evolve as kind of the common pattern across all regulations is processes and timeline around breach detection, investigation, and announcement, right? And this is a very encouraging trend, which the last bit is a very encouraging trend, because we believe that that will increase the general public awareness around what is the real impact of these breaches, and organizations will have to up their game as far as privacy regulation goes, because it's very embarrassing to call a customer or call an employee to tell them that hey, I lost your data, or I messed up in some way, right? So this the emerging common ground of not only being compliant, but also being able to prove compliance, right? Which is, I would say, as important as being compliant. That we are seeing as the common pattern. Uh, Sirin, is you've again run organizations who had to comply with more than one of these regulations. What do you see as the reason that these regulations become tough to comply? Like what's making it tough to comply with these regulations? And okay, let's start with that, and then we'll come to what kind of measures have you taken. But what's making these regulations tough?
Yeah, I can start with the legacy systems, since, for the legacy systems, especially to have the necessary controls and to start monitoring and management activities takes time. But, if you have a great governance committee or governance organization to do this, then it becomes a standard. It becomes a norm for each and every new systems. But for the legacy ones, it takes time. Even for the new ones, if you have the third party relation with somebody else, will partner with you to do some development, to do some technology, technology improvement, then also you need to handshake about the rules. That's also another part. It needs to be by design. We should think of the privacy first. That's one of the hardest part. Privacy should be by design for each and every new development, new application. Now we are living in an application world. We are living in an e-commerce world. So we are partnering with lots of companies. So even though you put your own rules, then extending those rules to the other parties is one of the difficult, I think, part of managing the things.
Mr. Rashid, what's making these regulations tough to comply to?
Well, the fast adaptation, or the fast changes that is coming to those kind of privacy regulations, and the speed to adapt to it is making it tough, and making sure that you are flexible enough, providing the service in the right way, and making sure also the privacy is well contained. You were mentioning a while ago, losing data and things like that. In the banking sector, that's not totally unacceptable. And that is one of the basics that we go and you work, with. Nevertheless, it is also, same rules applies to all other sectors, whether it is a health sector, whether it is a government sectors, and what have you. So today, data is the new mine that, mining field that everybody is trying to capitalize on top of, and we try to make sure we are making sure that is being fully protected. And on the other side, we need to be, given the right flexibility, the right application, as we are living in this world today, and making sure that the services are being provided 24/7. Customers need to be satisfied, and their requests are being fulfilled at the same time.
Yeah, and just a couple of additions. See, as we interact with enterprises, we've seen that privacy regulations become tough to comply because they sometimes conflict with other initiatives within the enterprise, right? So, for example, Shirin, you mentioned third-party collaboration, right? So, a lot of times enterprises have to collaborate with third-party vendors, partners, customers, lawyers, audit. I mean, the number of third parties themselves are increasing, and to be able to get uniform regulatory compliance across the whole value chain around an enterprise, that's something that we've seen enterprises struggle with, right? It's okay to comply internally, but now I'm also sending this data to a payroll processor or a data entry company or any third party processor, and now I'm also responsible for what happens to the data once it goes there, right? So that's making we've seen a lot of enterprises struggle with that. And the other thing here is a lot of times privacy regulations are in direct conflict with cloud adoption, right? Especially public cloud adoption, right? So enterprises do want to use all the power and cost savings and agility and flexibility of public cloud, but a lot of times regulations don't allow, or they are not, and so on. So those are, I mean, those are some of the things that we've seen enterprises struggle. And the last conflict that I'd like to mention is that very few cases, but sometimes there are conflicts between regulations themselves, right? So one regulation which the enterprise is complying with, regulation that the same enterprise has to comply with says go right, and the enterprise can't make that decision. And of course, these regulations evolve to correct these errors, but in the interim, right? So we've seen, just this regulatory compliance being, as these regulations come up and then they evolve over a period of time. Sirin, what kind of controls have you had to deploy? I mean, can you give us anecdotes of systems or process changes that you've had to make specifically to comply with these regulations?
Yeah, yes, I can give lots of examples, in that area, since, it also shapes up the organization and other roles again. So, now we have the DPO, meaning that, now we have the responsible people just understanding the regulations, but also trying to be proactive in the things, since the compliance not enough, you need to be adaptive, you need to be even proactive. So for that, we have lots of control. We have the governance committee with DPO. We are, trying to assess the things and also, understand the updates with the regulations and also create some awareness activities within the company. And if anything happens, we have that alert mechanism in the company. But, those are the things governed by that committee and that responsible person. Also, by design, we are doing lots of things. Like as I said, data minimization. It is always the rule. We are trying to anonymize the data, remove the data on the testing or Q&A systems, and also minimize the data. We are regularly checking data retention rules and also data access matrices. So those are the things we are regularly doing while designing the app or while doing any change on the app or the systems. And also we are doing penetration tests and monitoring monitoring the systems using our security operation center capabilities. And the secure DevOps there, we are doing secure code reviews, secure DevOps, and privacy by design. Those are the things we adapted into our everyday processes, and trying to be proactive and trying to comply, but also to be adaptive. So those are the things we are doing in the company.
That's very valuable. Mr. Rashed, what kind of controls have you had to put, I mean, in your long spanning career? Can you think of anecdotes where you had to kind of go out of your way to make sure that you're compliant, or the organization?
Well, as Shirin was mentioning a while ago, she covered most of what the common practices. In addition to that, what we do is that for testing, what we do is that we scramble the data in a way where it is meaningless if you get your hands on top of that. Especially even for internal resources to not to expose customer information during testing, and that is probably a common practice that we do. She mentioned the penetration testing and other things that we do. But data leakage is also one of the controls, compliant with BCI regulations for credit card information that is becoming a mandate, since 2011, I think. And also SAMA has put that as a mandate for even the debit card, applying and following those kind of compliance. Now, not only complying, adapting, and making sure that you are providing and securing those kind of information, and providing those kind of information to the right level, and making sure it is not being leaked, somewhere where it is not trusted. So, in this context, I think, in the banking sector, we are doing well. In addition to that, NIC has not yet allowed the banks to adopt public cloud, since it is not in the control and within the country. So we are yet having everything on premise, and that is providing an extra control over what, the data that we're doing.
Got it. And continuing that conversation, Mr. Rashed, one is, of course, compliance itself, but the second thing is proving that the organization is compliant. How do you go about doing that? Just proving. If a regulator comes calling, or a customer comes calling saying, hey, what did you do with my data? How do you go about proving compliance?
What we do is that what we have is multiple regular things that is also part of the being compliance, where we have to have our internal controls to do a checkup continuously and prove that. Also, SAMA provide a check upon the banks on regular basis, and that is most of the time is either planned or ad hoc. And we always comply with regard to having a questionnaires, when we are in a full link with SAMA to provide incident reports if there is, in case of any issues, regardless whether that is a data or non-data. They need always to double check whether there was a data leakage during any outage, in case of a system outage, and that is where they double check things like that. There is also the full control that is being provided and monitoring within the bank, where we have our own NOC team, where they are 24/7 monitoring. In addition to that, there is the cyber security, where it is a full monitoring for the whole country, and let's put it this way, to check if there is any such attacks. Thanks God, things look in a very positive way, where we have not encountered such a thing like that, because of those kind of multiple controls that we are monitoring. It is for the reputation of the organization, not only for the compliance sake, but it is also the credibility in front of the customers, as you just mentioned a while ago.
Yeah, I agree. And I think compliance regulations are only supposed to define the minimum. They don't, every enterprise has to kind of go beyond to make sure that their security mandates are fulfilled. So let me just pose the question again to you, back to you, Shane. How do you go about proving to yourself, and then to the regulators, and to your customers and employees and so on, that, hey, we are compliant?
Okay. We have regular compliance tests, and also, we have regular data leakage, testings, or we have, let's say, some assessments as well by external companies. Also for the customers, they are sending us questionnaires. So we are also trying to fulfill their demands in terms of regulations on their side. If it is a, let's say, insurance company, if it is a construction company, so with that kind of interactions, we are always testing ourselves, let's say, and that's a kind of activity to understand if we are in line with the regulations or not. But also that's we have a good discipline. As I said, we have the regular tests. We don't have let's say, governor assessing, auditing us regularly. We don't have such yet. In case an incident, just we are supposed to apply and inform. But other than this, we don't have such audit kind of things from the governor's side.
Got it. Okay. Well, if other countries are any indication, those kind of things are just around the corner.
Yes, indeed.
So let's just talk about some solutions here. We are in our last 10 minutes of this session. Let's talk about a couple of solutions, right? So historically, privacy controls or data controls in general, privacy, security, and so on, have been around systems. And the new standard in privacy compliance globally built into systems, but also privacy built into data itself, right? And I'll take a minute to explain this for the audience here. So historically, privacy controls like who should have access and the fact that this data should be deleted on request and so on, these controls are built into systems. So the core banking system or the collaboration system or this data is now spreading across the core transaction systems, the collaboration systems, the data warehouses, and so on. The emerging norm now, and what most large enterprises believe, is that implementing a uniform set of privacy controls in different systems is nearly impossible. And therefore, the only solution is to implement these privacy controls into data itself, right? So the data itself, a document or a database field or what have you, is aware of its own privacy regulation. So, for example, a document knows that it is not supposed to leave the Middle East, or it's not supposed to leave the Riyadh office of the company, and so on. What is your opinion here? Will this kind of innovation augment or just completely replace existing privacy controls? Maybe I'll pose it to Sirin first, and then ask Mr. Rashed to comment. Sirin?
Yeah, sure.
If data carries its own privacy, why do you need anything else, right? When that's the question.
Yeah. Yes, such data-centric approach to privacy and security it seems really good, very well. And since data is the most valuable asset of the company, ensuring the data don't turn in, and also it shouldn't turn into a liability. So we should fix it into data lifecycle, let's say. So it's a fundamentally different and interesting conversation for enterprises, for us to think again. If we have that security and privacy in the data, in the data-centric or data-related approach. So it is really food for thought.
All right. Mr. Rashed, any comments from you on this?
Definitely, this is to augment what we started with in the banking business. Privacy of information is by default is incepted, and with the new era of having those kind of connectivity and becoming a very small world, and the accessibility of data and sharing of data. Also, looking at it as we are adopting the open banking, nowadays is going to be also the data is going to be exchanged and is going to go be getting out of the geographical location, as per se, and assuming that the customer is also is abroad and he's trying to reach and she is trying to reach her data, that is also need to be fully protected. And definitely having the data centric protection is going to be augmenting what we have. It's not going to replace, but it's going to add more value. It is like a two-bladed sword where it is a plus and minus in any situation. And I think it is going to be an added value that need to be fully considered. And the whole thing is going to evolve as we move along. And this is a need, and there's going to be a continuous added value that will be later in the future, where more protection and ways of protect the data and the privacy of the customer information, and the organization information as well. It is not only customer; it is also the organization information need to be fully protected. And when I say organization, that is not limited to banking sector. I'm talking about any organization, and that is also, it has its own ingredients and it has its own value to the organization, and that is, if it is breached, it has its own threat to the company one way, or the organization one way or the other.
Very valuable insights there, Mr. Rashed. We are in our last couple of minutes here. Venki, correct me. And so what I'd like to do here is maybe just summarize at least what have been my learnings over the last 30, 40 minutes, drawing from many decades of experience here from the esteemed panel. But just on the last point here, as we see and interact with more and more enterprises in the Middle East, large enterprises and so on, we are almost seeing a sense of frustration, for lack of a better word, where enterprises and DPOs are almost disgruntled by the fact that starting with legacy systems and even to some modern systems, the challenge of implementing uniform security controls in sometimes hundreds of different systems that the enterprise uses is becoming nearly impossible. Right? It's a very, very difficult at best, and in most cases impossible task. And therefore, the place where we see most of the DPOs as well as security and privacy professionals land up is that they believe that data-centric privacy, data-centric security in general, and within that data-centric privacy is really the only option. Because more and more of these systems are moving outside of the control of the enterprise, right? Devices are becoming personal. There are a lot of people who are using personal phones and computers to do official work. Networks are all becoming public. Applications are moving to maybe not the public cloud yet in the banking sector in Saudi Arabia, but if you talk about the more general Middle East region, there is a lot of public cloud adoption that is happening. So that removes applications also are getting externalized, devices, networks, and so on. And in this environment, the very premise that I will be able to control the infrastructure that I'm trying to make secure or make private itself is vanishing. I don't control, as an enterprise security officer or an enterprise privacy officer, I don't control the devices, I don't control the networks, I don't control the applications. And so how do I even go about implementing all of these controls that the regulators just keep pushing on me, right? And where all of this is landing up, and in our view, is that the only thing that I do control, which I do know that I will own, is data. And therefore, this is really the only option. Data-centric privacy is really the only option for me, and implementing these controls in all of these systems is nearly impossible. But that's where we are seeing most of the people land up. Venki, I think we have time for a couple of questions, right?
Yeah. All right. Yep. So the production clock is ticking like a time bomb. And fortunately, we are still in the safe zone. So I've got a nod from our show director saying that we can squeeze in one or two questions. So good news there. So quickly, the first question, there are lots of them, but we'll probably be able to take on one or two. So the first one is coming, and that's from an auditing perspective. Are there new popular cybersecurity challenges to deal with during audits in large transformation programs? So who wants to hit the buzzer first?
That's a very broad question, but I'll take it. I'll direct it to Mr. Rashed.
Yes, there is. Data in transition, systems in transition during the transformations has a potential, threats, and that need to be fully considered during those kind of exercises, especially, when you have something to decommission or to put at rest, where you need to make sure that is also being cleaned out in a proper way. If that is the situation. Other situations, sometimes, exposing the data during the transition, making sure, the data is being protected in between those kind of transitions. I hope that I have addressed part of that. Due to time, we're not going to elaborate more, but I'll leave the floor to you guys.
All right. So, second question, which is how can organizations comply with the regulations in the case of sharing consumer data with vendors?
I can take this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, one of the standard procedure we have for each and every third party or vendor regulations. We have the data processing, contract. So that contract is really explicitly explain, the rules on each side, and also the controls and the responsibilities putting on to the vendor side, just to ensure that we are all on the same page and we are in line with the regulations. So this is the most important part of the procedure, let's say.
So, Vishal, hey, you would like to add anything
Over
to that?
here, I would like to chime in that one is to make sure that the whole value chain around an enterprise is also compliant with the same set of security and privacy policy. The other option is, like what we were discussing just a couple of minutes ago, is to make sure that the privacy is built into the data itself. And now if the privacy is built into the data, now you can freely share it and control what happens to the data after it goes to the third party or the fourth party sometimes. And we've seen a lot of third party risk controls and these third party privacy controls get combined into these data-centric security and privacy kind of initiatives, right? So as a solution. Yeah. Venki?
I think, can we just one last question? That'll be all for the day. How does data protection work at the organization level in the context of stringent rules on spreading the PI or the personally identified information or sensitive data? How can privacy regulations ensure that there is no lack of clarity in law in view of penalty concerns? That's exception to Europe. So, who wants to take that?
That's a tough one. I let me just comment a little bit about this. So penalty concerns are of course one driver for why privacy regulations need to be complied to. But I think my advice to everybody who says that regulatory compliance is expensive is to tell them, hey, if you think regulatory compliance is expensive, try non-compliance once and then you'll figure it out. Right. So
Absolutely.
non-compliance is always, and it's a regulator's job to make sure that non-compliance is more expensive than compliance. Right. But I'll redirect the question to Mr. Rashed. How do you accurately interpret these compliance frameworks?
Well, I agree with you. Non-compliant is more expensive, and sometimes you might lose the whole business altogether, and that is very threatening. Penalty is one way of addressing things, but penalty is just to get the attention and make sure everybody is alert, because when there is a penalty, and we're talking about something like a financial penalty or other kind of penalties, it's just to get the attention. And now that is not to prevent it, but to make sure that everybody is always at alert, because if you relax the rules, everybody else will just take the easy route, and they will just say, okay, it's going to be easily covered. And that is where the punishment is supposed to be always there, just to make sure everybody is complying. I don't think the regulator is after the punishment or the fines or the putting the penalties. They're after making sure that you're always going to be addressing and making sure that you are in control at all the times, and spending and going the extra miles to make sure you are compliant, self-compliant, and that is where you're going to monitor. And I think it is a human behavior today that we be living, and that is where we behave when we talk to others, and that is, you're being taught that accordingly, and that is where we're trying to adhere to it as an organizational way of doing things.
All right. So, sorry, the Vishal, I know we're squeezed in time, but seldom do you get a panel like this with you. So I'll hijack a few more minutes of yours. Really tough to hold back. So just one or two questions, and that's a promise. We'll not stretch it beyond that, right? So another question, which is on our screen now, and that's very interesting because the audience really wants to ask questions, and I don't think we should deny them the answers if we can. Well, the next question is impact on system performance, implementing privacy controls directly into data, especially online transactions. So I guess that's a comment, question, whatever you make of it.
I mentioned that.
Go ahead.
I said that while ago when I said it is a two-bladed sword because it is a give and take. It is. I mentioned that earlier, and I think yes, there is always a penalty on top of that, or you have to pay for the performance. We try, and that is where things going to evolve and to minimize that. I think you might have a better answer, having a systems and that kind of, systems being implemented and the performance to be addressed.
Very well said. Shirin, anything that you would like to add on this? Performance over?
Yeah, similarly, I think so. Every control, has also overhead. That's why, of course, but also, of course, there's an advantage putting the control into the data itself. You are expert on that actually. So, but I believe it should be well structured in that way, and also, I fully support a data-centric approach to security, and enterprises should think and also maybe should consider the load or the overhead, but it should be there.
I think the only thing that I'd like to add here is that uh, the question here is almost based on an assumption that data-centric privacy is an option, and I'd like to propose that data-centric privacy, data-centric security is not an option anymore. The option to constantly chase this data as it moves across systems and processes and enterprises and so on, that option is very quickly vanishing because the number of systems, number of people, number of entities getting involved in the processing of data is just constantly increasing. That data-centric privacy is not an option, right? It's just impossible. Any other option makes it impossible. So yes, there are overheads, but it's not an option, right? You just have to learn to live with it, live with the overheads. That is. I know, Venki, we
All
are
right.
in the last couple of
Yeah,
minutes.
yes.
So what I'd like to do here is just summarize what at least in my opinion are highlights, new learnings that I've got in these last 45 minutes or so, and then maybe hand it over to you, Venki. Yeah. So
Sure.
the big things that I've learned is that number one, privacy regulations, even though they are country or sometimes industry specific, they spread across, right? I mean, look at GDPR and how GDPR itself has affected organizations in the Middle East, right? There are a lot of companies in the Middle East who had to comply with GDPR, even though they are in the Middle East, right? And so on. The second thing here is that regulations are, in a lot of cases, up for interpretation, and really every enterprise owes it to itself to make sure that the right interpretations are given to these privacy regulations. Fines are increasing. The good news here is that regulators are talking to each other as well as to the regulated entities. And sometimes simple things like just data minimization and data masking can solve for a lot of problems, right? If you just reduce the footprint of data itself and not just unendingly keep collecting and storing data, that solves a lot of problems, right? Legacy systems are especially tough to control, right? Modern systems might be difficult, but legacy systems are especially difficult to control, and rapid evolution of these regulations as well as third parties, interactions with third parties of vendors and auditors and lawyers and so on, is making compliance more and more difficult. A lot of these controls a lot of changes have have to be done to make sure these compliances is guaranteed. Not complete, but some of these changes are just the evolution of the enterprise itself, right? The evolution of the DPO role, organization structure changes, besides people changes, awareness campaigns, right? The change in the development and the rollout process of any new application, any new initiative, to make sure that it is privacy by design and not as an as an afterthought. Frequent internal controls to be able to prove that to prove compliance and monitoring of systems and processes. I think those are big initiatives that an enterprise has to take up. And last but not the least is that really data-centric security and data-centric privacy is, for most enterprises, the only option. It's not one of the many options. It is the only option going forward as enterprises start losing control of their infrastructure. I think this has been a very, very useful and very knowledge. I can already see the halo forming behind my head here after attending this session. And thanks a lot, Sirin and Mr. Rashed, for being a part of this session. Over to you, Venki.
Well, yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with you. Very aptly summarized there, Vishal. So lovely, the panel. Thank you so much for taking out your valuable time and making this a wonderful afternoon, evening, whatever it was, but thoroughly enjoyed. And I think we fell short of time. So probably next time we should probably have a larger fireside chat, warm ourselves more to the conversations and with whatever else the knowledge, that we have to share. So lots more questions. We had the one lined up as well, but obviously we've overly overshot our time. So thank you once again. Lovely audience. Do keep tuning in. We'll keep organizing such shows on data security. And of course, for all those viewers who are tuned in, we shall be picking out the lucky winners. And of course, don't forget, you get that free security conversation around your security for the enterprise with Seclore security experts as well. So thank you, Shireen. Thank you, Rashed, and thank you, Vishal, and the wonderful audience as well. Do take care of yourself, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good day.
It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.